What does the phrase Black Lives Matter really mean? So before I roll into this video, my hopes is that people of all races, ethnicity, religious beliefs, or whatever learn to change your views and acknowledge that your upbringing has created your implicit or explicit bias that has shown and created you to have support for either side of the Black Lives Matter movement. And you must challenge your initial thoughts that are controlled by your bias. Studies have shown that biases, they're malleable, they can change. And we can all make a change if we're supporting one side or the other. Now look at me, I'm a white male Republican who loves his guns, who grew up in a small town of 300 people. My first time ever to talk to a black man was my friend and battle buddy during basic training in 1995. I would fit the description of most white men who have lost control of their behaviors and thoughts because their bias distorts common sense. The same is happening with the majority in our country, and the media loves this, and they modify their agenda-setting programs to fill our brains with disinformation and cause more hate and contention in our country. So what does Black Lives Matter mean? What does that phrase mean? So upon initial thought, if you're not black, you feel offended. And you think, what about all lives? We hear this all the time, primarily from conservatives, but even amongst our Democrats, stating that all lives matter. So stating that Black Lives Matter doesn't insinuate that other lives don't matter. Of course, all lives matter. That doesn't even need to be said, but the fact that white people get so upset about the term Black Lives Matter is proof that some white people do not acknowledge the fact that historical events have demonstrated that Black lives do not matter. Even the Black Lives Matter organization that was developed in 2013 because of Trayvon Martin incident, it's an organization that is focusing on the wrong thing. Their organization says things such as defund the police. So you want to defund a program that will prevent a black cop from coming to your neighborhood to protect you? There are a few bad cops out there, just as there are a few bad among any organization. And I'm going to talk about this a bit in another video I'm going to make later, where I have an idea of, I think, what could help assist police force from conducting, last minute behaviors that are fueled by implicit bias. But looking at the Black Lives Matter movement, so it should focus its efforts more on the systematic discrimination of our government policies towards African Americans. So I don't get offended when I hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, but that's only if the true desire of the person saying it, deep within their heart, is demonstrating Christ-like love towards those that differ from them. But I do get upset when I see what is happening in the streets around the world. I do get upset when I see these left-wing Antifa-style domestic terrorists destroying our cities. This violence is bad for everyone, especially social injustice for hundreds of years, ever since way back when black people would sell other black people in Western Africa. And there's not going to be a change. We're going to continue to see riots until we see some type of change within our government. So African business owners that we've seen today, they've suffered from the lack of stimulus funds supporting small businesses. And now their businesses are being destroyed through these crazy rioters. So before I go any further and explain what the phrase Black Lives Matter should really mean, let me point out one thing. So reflecting on this phrase and on the ministry of Jesus Christ, who spent most of his time with those that needed help, and looking in Luke 15, 1 through 2. So there we can see it states that now the tax collectors and sinners, they were all drawing near to Christ. And the Pharisees, they got upset. They were like, this man receives and eats with sinners and publicans. They were so upset. So publicans, they were real hated people. They were the tax collectors. Jesus ate with them because he came to seek and to save the lost. His actions showed who mattered the most. He showed that those who needed help mattered. White people matter, but they are already receiving what is needed. I can imagine that today, if Jesus had a Twitter account, he'd be tweeting hashtag sinners and publican lives matter. Jesus spent his time and efforts with those that needed the most help, with those that mattered. All children of God matter, but of course, Christ as a shepherd, as he teaches us, he would leave behind the entire flock momentarily so he could go after that one sheep, because that one sheep was lost and needed assistance and wasn't receiving the assistance. So that one time, that one sheep's life mattered, and he spent his time helping those that mattered. So what does it mean if something matters? When something matters, that means it's important. And the importance is shown through our actions that demonstrate support to that which matters. This support is shown through applying resources to what matters the most. Resources in the form of time, money, influencing others to support what matters the most. Have Black lives mattered over the years? I don't think so. Let's review some history and show what created a lack of Black lives mattering in the United States and what policies throughout history have demonstrated that Black lives do not matter. Because remember, we apply resources to things that matter. Resources in the form of a federal budget to support programs to help Black lives being successful. So looking back in history, it all started hundreds of years ago, and it wasn't about race. It was about the loser in a battle becoming slave to the winner. Slavery dates back that far. African Americans were slaves to other African Americans. Then we skip ahead to the 40s. It's all about money. Rich monarchs saw that the best way to make money through resource-rich continent was to use slaves for labor because it was free. You didn't have to pay slaves. It was all about making money. That's why they brought in the slaves. They tried to use Native Americans, but they would fight back, and a lot of the Native Americans started dying because all the Spaniards and Europeans brought all those diseases with them as they came into the continent slowly for money to take resources. So from there begins the seeds of racism. So Blacks, they were always seen as a lesser person than whites, and wealthier, explicitly or implicitly, policies over the years have shown who matters through the resources that we support. So the more resources for programs that are going to help citizens of the United States have supported more whites than Blacks over history. So once slavery was abolished, the government continent, it continued to demonstrate that Black lives didn't matter. Even after they were able to vote, the United States continued to come up with ways of voter suppression that targeted people of color. I mean, during the Great Depression, the United States enacted a series of policies under the New Deal to assist struggling families, and lawmakers reserved most of the benefits for white workers while restricting and excluding people of color. This action helped institutionalize and validate racial differences. This is happening today with the CARES Act. A lot of African Americans that are being hit the hardest by coronavirus are not receiving funds. In 1938, the New Deal Fair Labor Standards Act introduced a 40-hour work week, banned child labor, and established a federal minimum wage and overtime requirements that boosted wages, improved working conditions for thousands of white workers, and it largely excluded African American workers from receiving these benefits. This policy decision trapped families in poverty and endorsed the continual exploitation of workers of color. And the U.S. Equal Opportunities Commission back in 1965. So this is a program, and it's charged with enforcing federal laws, and it makes it illegal to discriminate against job applicants and employees based on race, color, religion, and things like that. However, the program's there, but the federal budget never gives money to this program so it can enforce it. And then there's also, Black Americans not receiving GI Bill after World War II. There's them not receiving housing loans after the Vietnam War. Our government's actions demonstrate who matters through the application of resources. And the resources are not going to Blacks, which shows that Black lives are not mattering for the government. Our government policies on both sides of the aisle continue to show that Black lives do not matter, even when the left attempts to show support. We can only see the support on the left, and it supports more of the rich African American families and doesn't support the poor African American communities when coming from Democrats and liberals. So I have a message that goes to all of you, those that say Black lives matter and those that say all lives matter. Now, I know the most of the damage that we're seeing right now with all these riots that we see with any riots once a Black man is killed by a white cop. This is not being conducted by those that live in the community or those that want to seek change. This is being done by domestic terrorist groups such as Antifa and Black identity extremists. But listen, if you say Black lives matter, so I want you to prove it. Everyone needs to prove it. Politicians need to prove it. If you say all lives matter and you are a politician, ensure policies provide equal resources to all races. If you are just a citizen, now this is what you can do. Stop spreading hate against the Black race by sharing social media posts that are not factual, that are full of disinformation, full of hate. If you're a Black Lives supporter, And if your heart truly wants to seek after change, show this love as well through your posts. And prove it by finding other ways than damaging the country that you live in. Just as a bunch of conservatives that we see show up with automatic weapons to protest the closing of America due to COVID, this does zero good for the support of the Second Amendment. And it's just the same as these riots and destruction of our country does zero good for the goal of making Black Lives Matter. So we need to see more of what we're seeing lately with blacks protecting white cops and blacks preventing rioters from destroying their own stores. We need to see more black and whites coming together, standing together for this injustice. Christian politicians, they're saying this all the time. They believe in Christ, but they are not showing it through their actions. So MLK, as I close with this, he stated in this quote here that he had a dream that blacks and whites would one day sit at the same table. Yes, today, we do all sit at the same table. But when dinner is served, the white man is getting more mashed potatoes than the black man. And the only way we're going to make this change is if the government policies change. It's the government's fault on both sides. Republicans and Democrats continually are not providing funds to the African Americans that would help them bust out of poverty and continue to be an equal line of wealth amongst the whites.